Yeah.
Patient, stay calm, stay focused.
Yeah.
You'll be fine. Okay. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me for this meeting of EASC today. We have some significant time constraints today, so I hope you will bear with me if I squeeze some routine items to give us time to debate the more significant items in greater detail, and I'll prompt you about that as we get to each one. So thank you very much for your attendance. First of all, I'm very well aware that chief executives have a very full day today, so I'm very grateful to you. Can I also remind you that this is a Teams live event, so if you want to contribute to the discussion, if you put your camera on, I will do my best to locate you and allow you into the discussion. If there's any problem, put something in the chat and one of my colleagues will prompt me to invite you in on that basis. We have only one noted apology for absence. That's from Tracy Cooper. I'm going to assume that there are no further declarations of interest that we don't know of already, unless people wish to declare them now. No, that's fine. In that case, can we move then to the minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of January? As you know, I normally go through these page by page. In view of the time constraints today, I'm going to ask if you would now consider the accuracy of the minutes as a whole. And please speak up if there is anything you wish to comment on or you wish us to change, please do so now, and I'll give you a few seconds to think about that.
Chair, currently we've only got 3 household members.
Are we quorate?
No,
No.
not until it's a 4th.
So I don't know if you heard that. Gwen has just pointed out that we are not quorate at the moment.
We are now. Suzanne's done.
Oh, thank you, Vice Chair, for joining. So we are now quorate, so I can formally ask you to agree the minutes on the basis of the accuracy of those from the 30th of January. Is that okay, everyone? I'm not seeing anything to the contrary.
Hayley came on screen, don't know whether she just joined or.
Hayley, you came on the screen briefly. Is that because you wanted to say something or?
Apologies, I just joined. Sorry, I'm a couple of minutes late.
No, not at all, Hayley. That's fine. That's no problem. Thank you. In that case, I'm going to assume that we are approving the minutes of the 30th of January. Again, with the action log, what I'd like to do there, if I may, is not go through each item one by one, but to invite you to make any comments or to ask any question on them. A number of them anyway will move on to the new committee, since this will be the final full meeting of the committee. We'll come to that later. So anything that's not picked up today in the main agenda from the action log will be carried forward into the new committee. We'll make sure that's all completed within the legacy statement. So are there any comments or questions people want to make on the action log, please? No, I haven't seen anything so far. In that case, is there anything else on the minutes of the last meeting that people would like to comment or ask a question about, please? No. Okay. In that case, we can move on. And the next item is patient story, which, as you know, we've introduced the patient story a few meetings ago. I think they're very helpful in reminding us why we're here. And I'm going to ask, I think our colleagues from EMERGS are going to present. So I think it's Stuart.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Stuart. Yes, we can. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So hello, by way of introduction, my name is Stuart Gill. I'm a consultant anaesthetist based in Glangwili in Carmarthen, and I'm also a consultant with EMRTS. Been practicing pre-hospital medicine for about 12 years, most of that with the EMRTS service, and I've been involved with the service since its inception in 2015. I'm also a clinical lead with EMERGS for Mid Wales, based out of Welshpool. So I've been asked today to introduce this story of Josh, a 20-year-old who was involved in quite a serious incident of March last year. And we feel this really typifies the role of EMERGS in the emergency response, in the pre-hospital response, and as part of the broader clinical support. The video you're going to shows how the combined actions of Benji, his friend, a bystander, providing immediate basic life support and first aid, coupled with the early response from the ambulance service and WASP colleagues, did what was required to essentially initially save Josh's life. And then the support that came with the mountain rescue team and our crew with EMERGS combined to save his life, get him to the specialist centre that was able to give him definitive care that was required. I believe the story that really shows that that EMERGS are very much.
I'll do it after.
Sorry, has someone not got their mic? There we are. Really believe the story shows EMIRTS in that supporting role for the first response, without which most of our patients wouldn't survive. We're there to bring the skills and interventions traditionally only available in the emergency department forward to the pre-hospital phase. And what that does is allow us to stabilize patients so that they can be safely transferred over significant distances to the most appropriate hospital after those immediate life-saving actions. So I think I leave it to Josh and our crew on the video to give you the full picture. And then I believe I'm available for questions regarding the story after.
Thank you, Stuart.
So hi, my name's Joshua Taman. I had an accident last year in Swallow Falls. It was just a normal day. I woke up, you know, my friend rang me and was like, do you fancy a little adventure? We've gone down to Swallow Falls, got out of the car, walked down across the river, stopped, dipped our feet in, and it was just a general nice day in the sunshine. And I remember my mate said to me, he was like, be careful, it's slippy, and then a couple of seconds later, just slipped and fell. I fell 50 feet down a cliff near the waterfall, landed on my bum, broke my coccyx, drowned in the river, cardiac arrest, sliced my head open, and the EMIRTS at the Welsh Air Ambulance came and got me.
So in March of last year, 2022, Josh was walking with his friends and was walking across the top of a waterfall when he slipped and fell approximately 50 feet into the water below. He fell face down into the water. His friends saw what happened, but obviously he was at the top of the waterfall. It took him several minutes to get down to Josh, by which time Josh appeared very unconscious and critically injured. He managed to pull him out of the water and perform CPR, and shortly after that the ambulance arrived, followed quickly by the Wales Air Ambulance. On arrival there, my colleagues quickly realised he was severely injured and critically unwell. They opted to give him an RSI, a general anaesthetic, at the scene, which meant that they could control Joshua's breathing and take control of his heart rate and everything else. Josh had 6 units of blood products, 3 units of blood and 3 units of plasma due to his injuries, and was also treated for spinal injuries and taken to the major trauma centre in Stoke for onward treatment for his injuries and his ongoing care.
I was airlifted to Stoke and was in a coma for 3 days. I woke up on day 3, and then it was day 5, I believe. I met Hayley from the EMIRTS at the Welsh Air Ambulance.
I met Josh personally on day 5 following his accident. He was awake, he was eating and drinking, he was talking. He'd gotten out of bed and walked with the physios and stood outside and got some fresh air. I went to see him on the unit to introduce myself and to explain my role as a patient liaison nurse for the air ambulance, and basically that I was there to follow his recovery, inform him of anything that happened at scene, explain the treatment that he was given by the crew, and answer any questions that he might have. Josh came back a couple of months after his accident to meet the crew at Carnarvon Air Base. He had a look around the helicopter, he had some photos with the crew, and he had a chance to speak to the crew about what happened that day. And it was really nice because he had a chat with the pilot as well, who had a lot to do with the incident as well.
without the help of the EMERTs, the Welsh Ambulance and everybody that helped me, including Benji, I wouldn't have been here today to see her or my girlfriend or my mum. So it's not just affected me, it's affected multiple people along the way. So to the medics that came to me and everybody at the Welsh Ambulance, and obviously my friend Benji, as black and white as it can be, I would not be sat here making this video without you. You know, it's as you save lives every single day. I just can't thank you enough for that.
Hey, thank you. That's really a wonderful example of what EMERGE does, I think. Stuart, is there anything you want to add before I ask for any questions?
No, I think just to summarise that case, really, I introduced it. Much of the information that I wanted to convey was in that introduction, but it really does show that joined up first response, most important for many of our patients, is that initial action by bystanders and the initial resources on scene from the ambulance service. And what we bring then is the ability to continue that work, get to the patients. The longer distances that often we see in Wales to appropriate centres.
Thank you, sir. That's really helpful point that you made there. Thank you. Any comments or questions for Stuart following that very helpful video? Not seeing anybody wishing to ask a question, so can I thank you again, Stuart, for your introduction and for the video. I think it's really helpful to see those things in that sort of detail, and also to have your confirmation that very often the first responders, if you like, whether they're in the public or the ambulance service, are very important to the work that you do as well, and you bring the expertise at a later stage. So thank you very much for that. I'm very grateful.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
Thank you. In my haste, I skipped over, of all things, the chair's report. So if you bear with me, I'll just go back very briefly to the chair's report. And I only want to say that, of course, this will be my final report as chair, as I end my term at the end of this month. And so I did want to take this opportunity, if I may, to thank all the members of EASC, both past and present, during the time that I've been chair, for all their support and for all the collaborative work that we've done. I think we've achieved a huge amount, and I'm very grateful to everyone. I'm also grateful to colleagues from WAST for all the information and advice that they brought to the table over the years as well. And of course, I want to thank Stephen and Gwen and the team here for all the support that I get. It may be a surprise to you, I need a lot of support, and they willingly give it, so I'm very grateful for that. So I wanted to place on record my thanks to everyone, and also to wish the new committee well from the 1st of April. So thank you. Are there any questions on my chair's report?
I just say, Chris, Jason's put in the chat bar, thank you, Chris, for your stewardship of the committee for all the recent news.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, no questions for me. Thank you very much. It's my final one, so I'm grateful there are no questions. And we'll move on now then to the 2.1, the performance report. And Ross, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I'll just draw members' attentions to a couple of high-level information within the report, and then I'll take any questions. So the report sets out that it's still quite a challenging position in relation to performance, and I'm sure members will have noted in the report itself that we have seen quite a growth within year-on-year, January to January, in terms of demand, both for calls and incidents. And this is particularly relevant for the red category, which again, you can see there's been quite a substantial growth in that level of demand. And we've discussed previously the issues around growing red demand and the draw on resources that requires to respond to. You'll note the handovers continue to prove a significant challenge, and we've seen quite a level of growth again within lost hours to handover delays over more recent months. And this is particularly challenging in that 4-hour and 10-hour plus waits. We have begun a piece of work to undertake a further analysis on the types and age profiles of patients within those much longer waits, and to explore if there are alternatives to how we could manage those patients differently. We'll bring that information through to the ICAP meetings with respected health boards as part of the delivery of improvements against that. You'll note the report talks about the ongoing work related to immediate release. I'm pleased to say that we're making good progress with the task and finish group around that. There's certainly increasing confidence from health boards in the quality of data and the validation of those data, and there's further work and a work plan in place now to further strengthen that approach in order to make that process highly functionable. There's ongoing discussions around the development of perhaps some national guidance on the actions that should take place following an immediate release request, but the group is picking up that work and will share that work with the new joint committee and its substructures, and continue to have those conversations with individual health boards through their ICAP processes. And then finally, Chair, just draw members' attention to the IMTP tracker. Members will note that shows that we are off target and off trajectory against a number of the metrics that we set out in last year's IMTP. We've recognised the challenges of that and the consideration of those performance improvements in isolation of each other. And as Stephen will set out later in our IMTP for next year, we intend to take a different approach as we move into 24-25, where we'll present a range of performance scenarios and draw out the interlinked relationships between delivery of one aspect of performance and the implications it has for other performance. So I hope that'll be a more sophisticated measure of how we look at delivering performance improvement for EMS in particular next year. I'll stop there, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions on the content of the report or the dashboards or any of the attachments.
Thank you very much, Ross, for that. Any comments or questions for Ross on the performance report, please? Can't see. Stephen?
I just say what I always say at this point in the performance report, which is we know the significant pressure that the system is under, but it would be remiss of us to then fail to recognise and acknowledge the impact that then has on ambulance performance. The performance is not where we want it, any of us want it to be, and the pressure on handover delays this winter has been significant. It hasn't been as bad as last winter, but last winter was a record for all the wrong reasons. But I think we've had longer sustained pressure, but we also know that we have industrial action, junior doctors, industrial action looming, which has had an impact, and also that has had an impact in previous months. So it's a matter, I think, of making sure that we redouble our efforts around this. We have to keep on top of this as we move forward. I do think that the clarifying the action, a small number of actions and concentrating on those was and is the right approach to adopt, and we'll continue to do that. And it's really important that we continue to operate in a collaborative way on this. Everybody has a role to play in this, we recognise that, but it would be remiss to say that performance is anywhere near where we want it to be, and there are clear impacts to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Yeah, certainly I think we've got a lot more to do. I just wonder, since we use ICAPs as one of the key tools in trying to collaboratively improve performance, when would we be in a position to evaluate the impact which ICAPs have had, Stephen? Can I ask that?
There's work that There's work ongoing, collective piece of work ongoing with ourselves, colleagues in the NHS executive and also health board colleagues about the impact of that. If we're not careful, we'll concentrate too much on the process and not enough on the outcome and the delivery. So it's a matter, I think, of getting that balance right. We recognise that. So we don't want to create process for the sake of process, but we need to make sure that we have sufficient information in the system to allow us to track performance closely and identify the actions that need to be taken to improve performance.
Thank you, Steve. That's the point I was getting to, I think. Nick. We can't hear you, Nick.
Sorry, yeah, my mic wasn't working. Yeah, thanks, Ross and Stephen. And I really just wanted to come in on the ICAP point, and I think Stephen's made a good point about the process, and we do tend to have an obsession with process over outcome. I met with the NHS executive last week and also the Welsh Government urgent and emergency care team, and I think what we will be looking for in the next 12 months is probably a review of, is ICAP the right methodology, and actually let's focus on a number of key actions that would deliver the improvement that we're seeing. Because I think, yes, we've seen an improvement in a couple of health boards, we've seen quite a marked improvement, but broadly the position is untenable, and therefore we need a different approach, because if we just keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result, then we're fooling ourselves, really. So I think we'll be looking to refresh actions sort of post-Easter around how we best manage ambulance conveyance, ambulance arrivals, etc. at hospital sites, with a view to looking at certain pathways which cause or are the causation of the vast majority. So, for example, if we resolved the number of patients who present in an ambulance with a non-injurious fall, we'd take out a huge number of those lost hours that we have at the back door of hospitals. Similarly, we've got issues around the frail elderly, who are the ones, unfortunately, who spend the longest time on ambulances. So I think we'll be looking to review the position, make a decision about whether ICAP is the right way forward and what are the other actions we can take.
Thank you very much, Nick. Yeah, I totally agree. That sounds a good way forward to me. I certainly think the ICAPs are a reasonable tool, but I'm impressed by what Stephen says in terms of making sure that the impact is measured alongside the process, because these things can run away with themselves, I think. But both in what Stephen says and in what Nick has just said, I think there's some prospects of making sure that it works to our advantage as we move forward. Ross, anything else you want to add?
No, Chair, nothing more from me on the performance report.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions on the performance report then? No. In that case, we'll note the report, and we'll also note the discussion around reviewing ICAPs and ensuring that we have impact from the work that we're doing here, so that we can sustain some improvement. I'm always struck by how variable things are when I look at the dashboard. You know, 1 week you think, oh, that looks better, and then the following week it's back down again. I think it's if we can just smooth that out through various actions, I think that would be really helpful. Okay, thank you, Ross. We'll move now then to the 2.2 and the quality and safety report, and you again, please, Ross.
Thanks, Chair. Again, I'll just draw members' attention to a number of aspects of the report, and then happy to take questions. So members will see within the report and in the dashboard that we're seeing an improving position against complaint response. While this is still not achieving the percentage target within 30 working days, it's pleasing to see a performance improvement against that. You'll also note that there remains a level of incidents being passed health boards by WAST under the joint investigation framework. And you'll also note within this iteration, there are 2 incidents that were passed to WAST from health boards. We do intend to review the joint investigation process in 2024, recognising there'll be roughly 12 months since the new process was established. We're clearly want to understand if that process is working, and as I guess touching on Nick's comment earlier, are the outcomes of the revised process delivering what we expected in terms of more robust system-wide learning around the causative factors and improvement factors for those adverse incidents. I'd also remind members that coroner's requests and coroner's inquests continue to increase. The activity around those is relatively significant, and we are seeing additional Reg 28s and inquiries into patients that have sadly passed away. And again, we've touched on that in the future work programme for the new JCC, there'll be ongoing work with the coroners, or attempted to work with the coroners on understanding their concerns and how we can aim to address those. Members will also note that if we look at the clinical indicators, and members have raised this previously, the challenges around compliance, and I guess particularly of note within this iteration of the report is the 31.9% compliance against the STEMI bundle. I have sought assurance from WAST based on members' comments at previous meetings that patients are receiving the care that they required, and WAST have been able to assure me that the bundles are being delivered. However, in the way the bundles are being recorded within the patient clinical record, that is not always easily pulled out as part of the reporting process. I have highlighted and reminded colleagues within WAST the need to improve that reporting of that compliance and the importance that has in terms of the publication of these bundles. And there's ongoing work around improving that, and at a station level and an individual level, in terms of ensuring that people are recording their clinical actions in the correct place on the patient clinical record. Members will also note that in the report that we've been able to publish for the first time the call to door times for STEMIs and stroke. This has been a long ambition of the committee, and I'm pleased that WAST have been able to produce these. The challenge now will be, how do we instigate improvement actions to mitigate and reduce those call to door times as much as possible, so that those patients with STEMIs and stroke are able to access their definitive care within as timely a manner as possible in order to improve their outcomes and reduce their length of stay. I'll pause there, Chair. There's no other issues I wanted to pick up, particularly from the quality report, but happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Ross. Any comments or questions for Ross on the quality and safety report, please? Carol.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Ross, for that. You made a mention about the coroners, the Regulation 28, prevention of future death notices. I think it's going to be really important that we're fully joined up between the health board and colleagues in what will be the joint committee function moving forward. And I just wanted to check in that you feel confident that you have the right links into the organisation, my organisation in particular, in terms of the work that we're doing here in North Wales on improving patient safety in this area.
Yeah, I'm kind of happy to have a conversation perhaps outside the meeting about appropriate representation, because I recognise there's different challenges in terms of information or Regulation 28 we've had from coroners, some of which are related to pre-hospital care, some of which related to inter-hospital transfer, and there may be different people that we need to engage with on both of those. But yeah, happy to have that conversation, and I know Stephen in particular is keen to develop this work as we go into next year, because I think what certainly my interpretation of Regulation 28 from coroners I receive is an increasing frustration around having to make similar sort of recommendations, and so a consistent approach across the JCC I think would be incredibly important for addressing those concerns.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you.
And I've got Phil, please. Phil.
Yeah, just wanted was interested in the information presented on stroke, ST elevation, MI, fracture neck of view, all that sort of slide of information, and wondered if in future it's likely that as the information is developed, will we see that by health board or by region, in case there's a sort of difference between a rural or urban population?
Yeah, Phil, so at the moment we don't publish that information at a health board level, but you're right, these are a relatively small subset of patients, and therefore is not it wouldn't be too difficult to draw those out at a health board level. I guess what I just recognise, particularly with ST elevation, numbers are very small, and therefore you may see large swings within each individual health board population. But absolutely, we can look at providing health board level information. I think particularly for call to door times, be relatively interesting as well, recognising that there's travel times to specialist centres for patients who are not as closely in close proximity to those either PCI centres or those hospitals able to provide stroke services. But yeah, we can look at providing bespoke health board level reporting.
Okay, thank you, Phil, for the question. Thanks, Ross. Any other comments or questions? No, I'm not seeing anything, so we'll note the quality and safety report, and we'll note the ongoing work around the coroners, particularly Carol's point, and also Ross will look at publishing details at a health board level in line with what Phil's just asked. We're receiving a message at this end that there are some network issues, and the video from Nantgarw is intermittent. So if you're having any problems, we do apologise. We'll plough on until we're told differently anyway. So thank you. We'll move on to 2.3 and the EASC commissioning update. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. There's a few issues to cover in this. The biggest item is the IMTP for the next 3 years. So I'll hold that until the end of the item and go through that. But I'll just pick up some of the other issues in advance. So what we have provided is we have provided a update on progress against the commissioning intentions for the third quarter for NET and EMS services. This is a regular report which we provide. I don't propose to go through that in detail, but I'm happy to take questions on that if colleagues have questions. Then we've done a similar report then in respect of the commissioning intentions 2023-24 quarter 3 update for the EMERS service. So if I just stop there and just check if any colleagues have got anything they wish to raise under that item.
Okay, anything for Stephen so far? No, I think we'll carry on, Stephen.
Thank you. In terms of the next strategy, we have arranged a workshop with colleagues from health boards across Wales to discuss and work through the NET strategy. The timing of that was quite important because what we needed to make sure about was that the timing of that workshop aligned with the timing of your service development proposals. Service nets and transfer services are can play a very helpful and useful role in supporting those service development proposals. So timing was an issue there. When I come on to talk about next year's IMTP, I'll pick up how we're thinking about accommodating that in the plan. So progress, I think in terms of that net strategy, this is one where we will need to think outside the box. So it doesn't need to be more of the same or a slight tweaking of what we do. We have to think creatively about this. and we have to make sure that the NEPS services are responding appropriately to the demands that are coming through, not only in terms of the need to make financial improvement, but also to make sure that we are supporting changes which will help elective care and also service redesign, and making that more patient-centered than it is. So again, I'll stop there, and happy to pick up any comments or questions on that before I move on.
So any comments or questions on the NEPS point, please? Can I just go Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just on the next point, I mean, I think it's really welcome that we're planning to do this work, and I guess it's very topical for us in CTN at the moment with some of the conversations we're having with our population about clinical services for the future and the potential consolidation and change around of a number of services. Transport is the number one thing that comes up when we have those conversations. So it would be really helpful, I think, just to think about not just about what we as providers and with colleagues in WAST and EASC do, but also how we're going to engage conversations at a local level with populations and citizens about this, because it quickly takes us into the territory of issues around public transport and things. There is something around also where we draw the lines between what we as the NHS do and what local authorities should be doing in terms of transport provision for their local communities, but also thinking about creative models of new transport to get people to non-urgent, either hospital appointments, clinical appointments, outpatients, etc. So I think there's something here about, yes, we've got to rethink the model, but it's about how radical and how sort of ambitious do we want to be in terms of our aspirations for thinking a bit differently about how we might do that in partnership with our communities and potentially the voluntary sector.
Thank you, Paul. I think that's a well-made point. Stephen?
Yeah, agree, Paul, that we do need to do that. So we'll make sure that we are very clear that that is included, and then work with you, with your engagement colleagues locally, about how we can engage on that. But and the point about local authorities is well made as well. So we'll need to include that. But we'll be as broad-minded and as radical as we need to be, because doing more of the same isn't going to do it. I agree with that.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Paul, and Stephen, for picking that up. I don't know if the workshop can incorporate the local inputs.
Well, we'll build that into the content of the workshop to make sure that we're able to draw that into the programme of work and take that into account.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think that's a very useful safeguard. Okay, carry on.
I'm going to move on now to commissioning intentions for 24-25. This is almost sort of completing the circle on these. You will have seen draft commissioning intentions previously, and we have taken these through the appropriate subcommittee arrangements, the appropriate delivery assurance group arrangements. We've also been working closely with colleagues in 111 to make sure that we're able to sign off the 111 commissioning intentions as well as the others. So what you have in front of you now are the commissioning intentions for EMS, NEPS, EMERTS and 111. They have gone through the normal governance process. There are no particular issues which I need to raise in those commissioning intentions. There should be no surprises for EASC colleagues in those. So again, happy to take any questions about those, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. Any comments or questions on the commissioning intentions then? I think, as Stephen suggests, they're well known. They've been iterated previously. David Lockie, I don't know if you wanted to comment, but you've come on the camera, which in a Teams live event suggests you might want to contribute, but thank you. You've gone off. Thanks, David. Okay, carry on then, Stephen.
I'm going to go on now, if I could, to the IMTP for 24-27. So the IMTP that you've got in front of you is follows a format that you will be familiar with because it's the format that we followed in previous years. If you do approve the plan today, obviously what we'll do is we will tidy the format up so that it looks like we've got the graphics right and those sorts of things. So we will do that, obviously. The plan is consistent with the planning guidelines that have been issued, and we have taken the content of the plan through EASC Management Group and the other supporting groups that we have reporting through to EASC. So you can take some assurance that we have done that. What we've also done is being clear about the links, picking up a point that Nick made earlier, the links between this plan and the 6-goal programme for urgent and emergency care. What we've also done is try to reflect the changes that are taking place locally in the plan, in our plan as well. So by working with your local leads, we've tried to make sure that we're reflecting those as well. So this plan, I think, is consistent with the plans that you are producing. So and it is also consistent with the WAST IMTP. In terms of the financial envelope, the plan assumes that the 3.67% uplift is passed through for the commissioning of ambulance, EMERTS and 111 services. For WAST, it assumes a 2.2% cost reduction programme to be delivered. And what we're also being clear about is how to handle cost pressures. So in terms of cost pressures, some of the cost pressures will be truly unavoidable. So an example of would be additional allocation, additional payment that WAST have to pay to Welsh Risk Pool, for example. So we would have thought that we think that's a legitimate, unavoidable cost pressure. If WAST didn't deliver something last year and then are putting that forward as a cost pressure this year, then we're not regarding that as a legitimate cost pressure. So the cost pressure is identified in the document and the accompanying slides on the finances. That's how we've dealt with cost pressures. What we've also done is we've also described how we think we can move to a value-based approach with this. It's really important that we make absolutely the best of the commissioning and allocation that we have available to us. So how we're moving towards that value-based approach is important, and the role that digital can play in helping us to innovate is also important. So we've included that in the plan as well. So then it's what are we looking for in terms of delivery? So in terms of delivery, for the uplift that we are making, that I'm suggesting or recommending we need to make available, then what we clearly need to do is to make sure that we're able to bolster frontline delivery, frontline performance. So additionality into the front line, into the WAST front line. It's important that we avoid conveyance wherever possible. So we're also recommending that we retain newly trained APPs because we think they have an important role to play in that. It is important that we do as much telephone advice as we're able to do. The overall aim here, obviously, is to make sure that only those people that really need to go into hospital are going into hospital, and if we can prevent people who are going in unnecessarily, that is what we will do. So in terms of the control function, the provision of clinical advice is important, and being able to redirect patients to the most appropriate part of the system is important. So we're saying that we will be looking for more clinicians in control. The duty of quality is a specific requirement for everybody in terms of it's a statutory requirement, so we have to make sure that we're covering that off in the INTP. So West will need some modest investment to make sure that they can deliver their duty of quality. We've just talked about the NEPS strategy. So what we've done is we've reserved a figure of around about £1 million to make sure that we're able to action and implement the outputs from the NEPS strategy. In terms of 111 services, we know that abandonment rates, call abandonment rates, have reduced, but we also know that there are specific times of the day and days of the week when we have high abandonment rates. So in terms of investment into 111, we're saying that should be on call takers and on clinical advisors to make sure that we, again, are getting the best advantage of 111, but people are getting their calls answered as well. In terms of EMERT service, we're going to come on to talk about the EMERT review, but we're also looking at ACT services as health boards enact proposed service changes. The requirement for those critical care transfer services becomes important. There are we have an agreement in place with Swansea Bay in terms of additionality, and we're assuming that rolls forward into next year. And we are working closely with colleagues in Betsy in terms of their particular needs. And again, there is a workshop that is being organised to work through the issues there to make sure we're able to provide the right service, and then we're able to link in to EMERTs and other services and the ambulance service and other services to deliver that ACT service. So those are the areas that we think we're recommending. We use the additionality in terms of the resources that are coming in, that comes from the 3.67 uplift and the 2.2% cost reduction programme. In terms of performance, as Ross said earlier, slightly different approach to performance this year. What we think is that there are three potential scenarios: a worst case, a reasonable case, and a best case. The worst case, we believe, is that handovers stay at the same level that they are at the moment, and then what impact does that have on performance? We're not recommending that that's what we do, but we need to understand if they didn't improve, this is what that would mean. The best case is that we deliver the 1 hour handover target by the end of the 24-25 financial year. I think that's very optimistic in terms of our ability to do that. But again, we're scenario planning that through to see what the impact of that would be. And then the reasonable case we're suggesting is that we deliver the 4 hour target that we have agreed previously, and that the profile up to the 4 hours doesn't change. And then what level of performance can we deliver for that? We're not just looking at performance then in terms of red and amber response, but we're also looking at that in terms of how many of the calls have we redirected to appropriate alternatives, how many of the calls have we stopped because of the provision of advice, and how we've reduced conveyances by the attendance of suitably qualified ambulance personnel on scene. We're either able to treat individuals or direct them to the right part of the service. The Cymru Connect service we think is going to be helpful in this space, because we know that what we don't have available 24/7 is all of the alternatives that we would like to have available. And what we don't want is patients to default into hospital because that's the case. So if we can safely look after and hold patients until those alternatives become available, we think that's a sensible thing to do. So in terms of the way we track all of that through and what the performance report looks like, then that's how that will be presented in the future. And then in terms of what the detail on what that looks like for every health board, we will then have an ICAPS or equivalent to cover those things off as part of the overall quality and delivery framework. We're doing a bit of work on demand in terms of what does the level of demand look like. So there has been a shift in demand has stayed relatively flat, but there's been a shift in terms of red demand and amber demand. So we need to work that through and understand that. I'll stop there because I've said a lot, and I'll pick up any questions that any colleagues might have, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. That's a lot there. So, Linda.
Thank you, Stephen. My question actually goes through quite a few of the things that you've just said, which is about the visibility. How might we develop a more visible localisation of the plan, whereby the actions of WAST and the actions of the health board are reported in town? So there's a plan for a patch, and there's a kind of integrated performance report. And one of the things that made me start to think about that was you talking about your remote clinical capacity and an extra 23 whole-time equivalents, and I was immediately obviously thinking, well, what does that mean for us? How does that fit with our services, and how do we develop in tandem?
So the short answer to that question is by developing bespoke frameworks on a health board by health board footprint. Linda would start to work that through, which have what actions are being taken, what outcomes we'd expect for that, and also if we are missing, if there are additional opportunities that we could realise, what do those additional opportunities look like, and how can we go about delivering those. So taking it from an overall national framework into more of a health board footprint set of frameworks is the short answer to the question, Linda.
Okay, any other questions? I can see Richard.
Mute, Richard.
We can't hear you, Richard.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks, Stephen. A couple of questions. One of them leads on from Linda's, and that's around expected outcomes, but measurable outcomes as a result of these interventions. So are those interventions successful? By what percentage might you expect to reduce the volumes being conveyed to hospital as a result of putting these things in place and then tracking whether or not they're delivering? That was the first thing. And then secondly, I'm very conscious that while we focus a lot on redirecting people who call 999 or 111, actually it's often the case that other people call on other people's behalf, and particularly that's the case with frail elderly people. And so it's not necessarily appealing to people to look for alternatives. Sometimes those calls are made as a last resort, and I'm also very conscious of those people who get stuck in hospital. It's often in that group of frail older people, and there's often not necessarily an intervention that a paramedic would perform on the site when they visited those people in home, but rather a recognition that hospital isn't the best place. And so I just wondered, in terms of recognizing frailty and developing expertise in frailty and what should or shouldn't be conveyed to hospital is part of that knowledge that's there for those first responders.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So a couple of points in terms of the sort of local frameworks that I was talking about. I think we need to be clear on what's the standards of care that we're trying to deliver, and what's the level of activity we've got for those, and what are we then getting from the resource envelope. How do we have a model that delivers that? What are the operational actions that we can take, and then go to the point that you were making, how do we review and how do we evaluate that? Because I think there will be some important learning from that. So I think the structure of those frameworks and how we cover it and how we report back on it and how we work with you is quite important. So that's the one issue. I think the second issue on the frailty point is, I think there is a point where you're right, it isn't just ambulance service, and it might not be best led by ambulance service. This might be best led by health boards. There's certainly a role for the National 6 Goal programme in this, and we have to play our part in this. So we wouldn't be leading that, but we would be an important element of that. And we'll need to make sure we can respond appropriately with local frailty strategies. One of the things I think we would be they're all trying to avoid is that, as you were saying again, that the default position isn't that somebody goes to hospital because there isn't anything else available at that time. So I think, what does that look like, and how can we look at that, and how can we get some immediate results from that? But it's this sort of, but the frailty issue is the nut to crack. I agree with that. So that's my thoughts on that. Happy to be corrected, Richard, but also happy to work with you in terms of how we might move that forward and play our part in this big piece of work that's necessary.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Any other questions on the commissioning update? I'm not seeing anything. So I think we need to go through this in some detail. And so we're noting the requirement for attendance at the NETS workshop, which is next month, I think.
Yeah.
And also taking into account Paul's point about community engagement being a necessary part of how we move forward with the strategy. I think we've already spoken about the review of the ICAP format, so that will be part of this as well. I don't hear anything against the IMTP. I think we're approving that, but with some clarifications around the localization of plans, and Stephen's suggestion of bespoke frameworks and so on to reflect local arrangements, and also Richard's point around reducing conveyance and the elderly frail point that we've heard about, which is one that we encounter quite a lot, I think. So some solutions to those issues would be included as part of the ongoing work. But I think we are approving the EASC IMTP for 2024-27. I think we're noting the commissioning intentions. I don't think there's anything new in those, but we will need to formally approve them, of course, so that we can move forward into the next year. I think I've covered everything there.
What I'll do is I'll make sure that the final version of the IMTP with those additions and those amendments that we have talked about is circulated around to make sure that colleagues are happy with that before it is submitted. Chair.
That's very helpful, Stephen, and I'm glad you suggested that. So what Stephen will do is work those points in that we heard from particularly from Linda and Richard, and send that out. Well, it will have to be fairly swiftly.
Yeah,
now.
We'll send it out.
We'll get that out just for formal endorsement, but the bulk of it is obviously approved. But in view of that recent discussion, I think we just need to clarify that. So Stephen will do that, and you'll see it next week.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll move now to 2.4, which is a significant item on the EMIRS service. And I'm going to ask Stephen to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So we've provided you with an awful lot of detail and an awful lot of information. So what we thought we'd do is step ourselves through a presentation which captures some of the key points. I know that since we have produced this report, that we've had additional correspondence in from Llais. I received correspondence on Sunday, for example, and I believe that Health Board Chief Executives have also received a similar letter. So we're going to cover that off because it's really important that we give due consideration to the representations made by Llais. So we will pick that up. We also know that there has been direct correspondence received from a member of the public in Powys through to health boards. So we will pick that up as well as we go through the presentation. I also understand that Hayley has received a petition on behalf of EASC, which I think which obviously we'll need to note and take due consideration of in the discussion and debate that we have during the course of this item. So I'll just stop there and just make sure I picked up all of the items that people are expecting us to cover, and then we'll move on to the presentation. There'll be plenty of opportunity then for people to ask any questions that they may wish to ask.
Thank you, Steve.
Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Ricky. So just to remind us all that the review that we've been undertaking since November 2022 is independent of the assumptions, comparisons and modelling that was included in an original proposal that was received by the committee from the charity and EMIRS. And it's always important, isn't it, to recognise the purpose, and the purpose is to ensure that as many people as possible benefit from the improved clinical outcomes by making the best use of the clinical teams that we have across Wales. What we know is that there are people that could benefit from the service that are not receiving the service. They're not receiving that excellent service, which is evaluated really well. So we know that more people could survive, and people could have a better quality of life if they had access to the service. So this couldn't be more important, and in that respect, it is a very emotive and a issue that has generated a lot of interest. It's also a national issue, but we have to take account of local interests in that as well. So there's a little bit to balance in terms of working our way through all of this. But we do know that there are 3 people a day who could benefit from the service that are currently not benefiting from the service in the way that it is structured and organised at this moment in time. Thank you, Ricky. If anybody wants to stop me at any point, just please do so. I don't want to talk at you, or you can wait until the end and then fire your questions away at me. So what we've done so far is we've done 3 phases of engagement. We have used historical data, and we've used them, but that historical data is the most up-to-date data that is available to us. We've had a look at utilisation. What we know is that there are different levels of utilisation across Wales. So we know that utilisation is in South Wales is much higher than utilisation in North Wales and North Powys. We know that we have a high level of unmet need, and we know that there are different times of the day when that unmet need is highest, and that particularly affects North Wales. We know that a lot of detail about geographical and population analysis. One thing I'd ask you to bear in mind on that is that population coverage isn't necessarily the most important issue. It's making sure that we can cover the incidents that are needed to respond to, that are linked to geography and population. We have agreed previously an evaluation framework, and we have tested that evaluation framework through phases of engagement. So there are 5 factors, and there are weightings agreed for each of those factors. And we have modelled a range of operational scenarios, and we've also tested those operational scenarios through the engagement process. And indeed, what we've done is we've introduced new operational scenarios as a consequence of listening and responding to the engagement process that we have followed. I'm extremely grateful to Health Board and Trust colleagues for nominating an excellent range of individuals to attend a workshop that we held to undertake an option appraisal exercise. That workshop evaluated very well. There was an enormous amount of detail that we included in that, and I'm grateful for the very professional way in which health boards and trusts worked with us in terms of that workshop. And that wasn't something that we took part in, but it's something that we supported. I'm also incredibly grateful for our colleagues in health boards for the support they've provided us and the advice they've provided us on the development of the equality impact assessments. We've developed these equality impact assessments as we have gone through the process. So I'm incredibly grateful for the support and the collaborative effort that we've not only done at EASC, but also that your health board, that other health board colleagues have supported us along this journey that we've been working our way through. So it's a thank you from me on that. Thanks, Ricky. So in terms of the decision-making timeline, we have the meeting, we issued papers on the 12th of March. We have the EASC committee meeting today when we're asking you to consider the review and seek support from you to inform the final decision at EASC on the 28th of March. And I know that you'll be wanting to take this report through your boards. If there's anything that I can do in terms of supporting that, or anything that I can do in terms of providing additional information or answering questions, please don't hesitate to ask me, and I'll do whatever I can to support that. And then we have an extraordinary EASC meeting on the 28th of March to approve the recommendations. Thank you. So just a little bit about what we're funding now and how it's used. First thing to say about the funding is that within NHS, we fund about 1/3 of the service, and the charity fund about 2/3 of the service. So the charity are a key stakeholder and partner in the delivery of this service, and we're very fortunate to have the charity working with us. We have more people in Wales have more helicopter time available to them than any other part of the UK. So the fact that we have a successful charity is really important, but I am aware that the longer the process goes on, the more risk the charity is under and their ability to raise funds. So there's a financial risk for charity associated with this as well. I'm acutely aware of that. So in terms of where we are at the moment, we've got 5 teams which operate per day, 4 day shifts and 1 night shift. So the 1 night shift operates from Cardiff Heliport after 8 o'clock and is the only resource that we have available to cover Wales. So we're essentially covering 60 crew hours each day. What we know is that the utilisation rate varies across sites. So that we know the Cardiff Day crew, for example, there were 7 days in 2022 when they didn't have any work to do and therefore didn't arrive on scene as a patient. We know that the figure for Davin is 43 days, and then we know for Welshpool it's 133 days, and for Carnarvon it's 146 days. Now, I think presents us with an opportunity in terms of how can we make better use of these valuable crew time that we've got, the equipment and the assets that we have available to us. Instinctively, you'd think there are things that we can do about that, and indeed that there are. What we also recognise is that the needs of rural areas are different to urban areas, but I don't think we are expecting the difference to be as stark as it is. And what we also know is that the highly skilled and experienced clinicians that we've got are not being used effectively as they would wish to be, and we would wish them to be in some of the bases. Thank you, Ricky. Talk a little bit about unmet need. So this, at the moment, in 2023, there were about 1,000 calls that required an EMITS response that didn't get an EMITS response. The EMITS service is a highly specialised service, so it responds to less than 1% of all of the 999 incidents. So it's a highly specialised service. I think there's a little bit here around, is it too highly specialised for some parts of Wales, which is we'll explore a little bit later. But we know that there are about 3 patients a day that could benefit from the service that are not getting access to the service. So what can we do about that? Thanks, Ricky. Just have a little look at that unmet need in 2022, and over 70% of the unmet need occurs after 8 p.m. So it is clear that having one shift available, one crew available after 8 o'clock at night, working from Cardiff, is not sufficient to meet the demand that we are getting. And that particularly impacts upon the Betsy area. And there are over 500,000 people in North Wales that currently are not receiving access to the service after 8 p.m. at night, which is why that figure is so high. What we also know is that there is unmet need across all areas in Wales. And the reason that we have quite high levels of unmet need in South Wales is because the aircraft or the car is being drawn out of the area from Cardiff, so it is not available to respond in the South Wales area. If we had another asset available in North Wales at night, probably until 2 a.m. in the morning, and that would mean that obviously we would be able to meet a significant chunk of the unmet need in the Betsy area, but we'd also be able to meet unmet need in other areas as well. So this is something that affects all health board areas, not just Powys and the Betsy Cadwallader area. Those figures are quite stark, I think, and it's something that we need to do something about. Thank you, Ricky. I'm going to ask Lee to go through a number of things for us in a minute. But we have been working closely with CLICE since the autumn of 2022. They were CHCs then, but we've been working closely with CLICE throughout all of the engagement sessions that we have had. And in the pack that you've got, there is a full engagement report which is being prepared. What we've also included in the report is an appendix 2, which responds to particular issues which CLICE have raised during phase 3 of the engagement process. And we have received a letter from CLICE, which of it didn't come through in time for us to include in the papers, but it would be remiss of us not to cover that, though, the issues raised by CLICE in that letter as well. So they have made important representations, and it's really important that we give those representations pay due account and respond accordingly to those representations. So I'm going to ask Lee now to go through the detail of that, and then once we finish that, I'll come back and we'll work our way through the rest of the report. Lee, over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. Morning, everyone. And as Stephen has said, members would have received Appendix 2 in your papers pack, Appendix 2 to the EMITS paper. So just to go through each of the points on the CLICE letter in response to the drafted engagement report. Comments received were on the process as well, the overall process, where it was noted that CLICE didn't feel that having 5 days to respond to the report was sufficient time to analyse, which we recognise, and we apologise for the timescales that we were all having to work within. However, the snapshot reports that were prepared and issued to LICE as well as health boards on a weekly basis, and a composite report at the end of the engagement period after the 29th of February was it was hoped that that was helpful in some of the mitigation and assurance on that point. It was also noted by LICE about not having the service review report or the EIA to view alongside the drafted engagement report at that time. That would have been helpful, and again we apologised for that because of the stages that those other documents were at. But we've welcomed the comments on the report, and we'll consider them as feedback through the Health Board's considerations as well in the follow-up extraordinary meeting on the 28th of March. LICE noted that they didn't think it was clear when reading the drafted document, on what some of the actions and changes meant. So, for example, the bespoke ring-fence resource to be used within a different clinical model for rural communities, and we agreed, and this has been amended, and some further clarification and explanation has been detailed as part of recommendation 4, and has offered a further discussion with LICE about that in terms of how that's developed going forwards, and I know that that's the subject of consideration and discussion for today on today's agenda. LICE also noted regarding page 37 of the draft about option 6C, and to explain what a forward operating base for Carnarvon and Welshpool would mean, and this was explained, we noted and agreed with that, and that was edited and explained in more detail in the final engagement document. They also noted that in the absence, sorry, excuse me, in the absence of an equalities impact assessment, that the statement on the drafted document of page 46 about the EIAs having due regard for the different options that have been developed and considered in the way that EMIRT's patients receive the service wouldn't change. Again, we apologise for not being in a position to send that at that stage, but it has been obviously distributed since, and that information is detailed in the engagement report and in the review and in EMIRT's covering paper. So the intention was to explain that patients will continue to access the services they do now. So that's through the 99 call route with Welsh Ambulance Service. The patients would not necessarily be aware of where the team would respond from in terms of crew bases, as that would very much depend on the clinical requirement of the patients and the incident scene and the type of team that would be best placed to support that patient and support that incident. So that's been amended to reflect all of that. And the further comment regarding extra actions have been developed, asking for a further explanation as to what the actions are and how they've been developed. Again, that has been noted and edited. LICE also noted about the timeframes made available between publishing an engagement report and associated papers and any decision meeting that's happened. So we've provided assurance on that because the papers obviously for this committee meeting were published 7 days in advance, but there's the respective health board considerations, and those meetings are taking place between the 20th and the 28th. And then the reconvened extraordinary EASC committee at 5 o'clock on the 28th will also be taking place. So that brings it to a total of 14 days, in excess of 10 days. So that point has been addressed there. And this similar point, their next point about thinking that it would be prudent for all health boards to have respective considerations within their board meetings, and that provision has been agreed and made. There were questions asked, the next 2 points in the appendix about notes being made by the EASC team and feedback responses being available, and would they be included in appendices. We have explained to LICE rather that this could be done. This can be made available, but there is some amount of work to be done in terms of redaction because of the amount of personal information that's been received through all feedback responses. So we have some information available, but further work would need to be done as well. And the Commissioner confirmed with LICE that this would be something for consideration at today's meeting. So I'm happy to pause on that point, Stephen, if you wanted to discuss that now. We
can move on. At the end, people may well have questions about this, about the the overall approach with ICE.
Okay. In terms of the, excuse me, the engagement report itself, Llais noted about the length of the document, it not being written in everyday language, and it was explained that this was done, this was prepared in the first instance for committee members for today's meeting, but we agree that there is merit in producing a sort of everyday summary as well as easy read options, and again they are for consideration at today's meeting. We've also confirmed with Llais in response to their point about the use of acronyms and an executive summary that they have been kept to a minimum. They have been clarified in the document, and an executive summary is contained within the engagement report itself. The further notes, points raised refer to some information being featured in full in terms of Welsh Government's guidance, which was noted and edited. The same with typos and some spellings. The note regarding the interchange between unmet need and lives saved, further clarification has been provided on that, so that was noted and edited as well, as was the suggestion about some rewording of the preferred option following the conclusion of the full engagement period on page 7 is moved and repeated, so that was completed action as well. Llais noted that on page 13 of the draft it referenced the campaign group's Facebook pages that they created and the membership and following. They did ask for what further analysis of the feedback had been done and where it had been considered, and we were able to confirm that feedback wasn't collected through Facebook as a formal route, and this was not shared as such at any stage throughout the engagement and wasn't promoted as such, but this information received through the engagement process of all the other routes that were available, including the petitions, was considered and included within the findings section of the report. Llais also noted that the feedback addressed some of the concerns, but and it included some responses. That's not within the engagement report now, that's within the review main report document. But they did ask for some simplification of and clarification and softening within some of those responses, and that was noted and edited. It was Llais noted the gap in engagement with people under the age of 45. Again, this was addressed. This has been this information has been shared through the weekly snapshot reports, which was submitted to health boards at phase 3 specifically, I refer to, and where they were using their local engagement strategies to reach different parts of their communities through their sort of current engagement activities and routes. Data completion within the responses was optional, so we've only got the information that we've received that people chose to share. But we know that throughout the engagement that took place throughout the whole period, not just phase 3, that we did meet and engage with young people as well, predominantly in different age groups. That's consistent with what's detailed in the engagement report, but that was the purpose of having a representative sample to make sure that we were capturing a representative response and picture from the people of Wales. Llais's next point about page 49 of the draft, that again that was noted and edited, and that was in response to the responses and perceived impacts. So that's been clarified. And a final point about the report having a fairly honest and has been fairly and honestly reflected in terms of sentiment, that was noted and appreciated. So all of the feedback and comments that we've received from Llais have been very helpful in shaping and informing the actions as we've stepped through this engagement process. So that was Appendix 2. I don't know whether you want me to pause there or move on to the Llais letter received Sunday evening.
So if we do the Llais letter, and then there may well be questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So as Stephen explained, chief executives of health boards would have received a letter from their regional representatives of Llais, and this was received, excuse me, from by the Commissioner on Sunday, the 17th of March. So it's important to cite members today on the detail of some of those points raised, which some will be familiar from the Appendix 2 that's just been covered. So again, Llais wanted to reiterate the concerns about phase 3 timescales, and that the timescales were tight, they were challenging, and concerns about potentially compromising the time given for consideration. So the timescales were discussed at EASC in December, following Llais's letter in November. And when the Commissioner met with the Chief Executive of Llais on the 15th of December, the planned approach was discussed, and it was agreed that that was the plan that would be taken forwards. And they were always going to be challenging timescales, but in mitigation of that and further assurance, the snapshot surveys would be provided to ensure that the latest picture was being provided, not just to Llais but to health boards as well, to demonstrate whether or not anything materially different was coming through in that feedback as it was landing. We know that when we've met with Llais, they have said that they found those snapshot survey reports helpful, as did the health boards, and we trust that that satisfies that point in terms of mitigation. They note as well that what was previously the Board of Community Health Councils and now Llais have listened and shared with what was being heard with CAS, with Commissioner, with the committee and the seven health boards. And again, we note that, and we are grateful for the input and contributions made throughout the process. And Llais have also summarised what they've heard and they've seen, particularly in relation to phase 3. They've confirmed that they've predominantly heard from communities in Mid and North Wales, which is also reflected in the review's engagement report. And it largely mirrors the themes that Llais confirm in the phase 3 engagement report. The Llais letter goes on to note additional points that they heard. However, I think the additional points in the main are covered within the engagement findings section of the engagement report. But what they wanted to note specifically was that people and communities don't feel reassured of the impact of the proposal on rural areas. Members will recall that this has been noted and reported back through the regular EMERTS service review update reports about the levels of anxiety and concern that communities were feeling, communities close in the locality and surrounding areas of Carnarvon and Welshpool, and that's been consistent throughout the review. Throughout the process, it was also important to understand where the belief came from, and with the engagement with hundreds of people, it's recognised that this belief it's difficult to counterbalance that with the correct assumptions, because it's confusion about what the service provides. That's been definitely a consistent theme that we've seen throughout the engagement process. That EMERTS is a backup to wider sort of health service provision in those areas. Information was provided throughout the engagement to help correct this perception and explain what the service provides and the specialised nature of the service. Llais also note that people and communities don't feel reassured that there will be no impact by the decision to move bases. And again, this was heard consistently throughout all phases of the engagement. It's important to note that both option A and option B result in more incidents attended and increased coverage at night for the whole of Wales. That's been reported within the review document. Respondents did maintain an assumption that the service again provides that fallback to wider emergency responses and health service. And again, that information was provided to clarify and explain what the service is and the very specialised nature of the service, and the role that it has to play in the wider system. The next point that Llais raises is that people feel strongly that option A and option B would lead to further reduced emergency provision in Wales, particularly in relation to red call statistics. So as previously mentioned, both option A and option B result in more incidents attended and increased coverage at night for the whole of Wales, and that has been set out in the reviews report. And the work undertaken about recommendation 4 addresses the concerns and issues heard in the engagement, and I know Ross will be coming on to that later and going through that in more detail. LICE also noted concerns about further erosion of services to rural areas, and members will recall again that this has been consistently presented in the emerging themes at committee at different stages of the engagement process and review. However, it was also noted that some of these issues that were raised weren't necessarily within scope of the review, but were shared and raised with Welsh Government and policymakers and partners in the wider healthcare and social care systems. That information has been shared, but it has been noted as a very important context and shared throughout the governance process. I'd like to note that people in communities feel that they have been engaged with but not necessarily feeling listened to. And obviously it's pleasing to note that people feel that they have had opportunity to participate. But as is reflected in today's covering paper, we have seen a shift recently in phase 3 from positive to more negative sentiment towards the engagement process and decision-making process. Something that went from sort of positive to negative. We've previously reported the activity, the engagement activity that's been commended, and the transparency. Lots of comments and compliments have been received, and they've been shared at previous EASC meetings. We also know it's part of public record in plenary in June last year, and LICE's letter to the Commissioner in November. So there's very much been that shift from previous phases to this most recent phase. But there has been, as previously reported, extensive engagement and evidence to recognise the concerns and anxieties of populations local to Carnarvon and Welsh pool bases. LICE also note a continuous feeling that a decision has already been made, or a decision had been made before any engagement even started. Again, this has been reported, and reassurance has been provided at every step of the engagement process that that isn't the case, and an explanation provided on the decision-making process and decision-making routes. Recommendation 4 is obviously a direct result of that feedback which is part of the recommendation package, and that has been used to evidence in response to LICE's point there. LICE also note that people found the review itself hard to understand because of the complexity and volume of the documentation and lack of clear information for those who wanted facts. This has been a difficult thing to balance, because during the engagement we've received lots of comments and feedback about the amount of information available and the documentation. So we recognise that it's been a difficult balance to strike. Some people want very simple, simplified, condensed information, and other respondents were looking for far more detailed and extensive technical information. So we've responded to that feedback throughout the process, providing as much or as little information as possible. We've provided lots and lots of information to make it available in the instance that respondents want it and they want to go through that. But equally, we've made summarised everyday language, plain language and easy read versions available. So we have remained agile to those requests and responded to the feedback that we've received all the way throughout. The next 2 points on LICE's letter refer to the options appraisal workshop. They had concerns about it not being inclusive, of not including any community representation. Obviously, this part of the process, options appraisal, was always part of the overall review plan, and this was articulated throughout the process. It was an EASC agreement to have health board representation to contribute towards that process. It was a technical assessment of a clinical operation against the agreed evaluation framework. What we did do is take the evaluation framework, the draft version of that, out from phase 1 and tested that with the public as part of the engagement process, and it was amended and adjusted based on the feedback received. So that was clearly articulated throughout. Again, we've just seen a bit of a shift in that since the options appraisal took place in January. It's important to note, as has been previously covered, that the options appraisal workshop did include representation from health boards and across disciplines as well. So clinical, medical, planning, communications, engagement, financial, plus colleagues from other parts of the services as well, strategy and planning. So it was a comprehensive representation of professional skills that contributed to that part of the process. Let's also note that there were only 2 options provided in phase 3, a base in Rutland and B, a base in Rutland with an RRV in Wrexham. But it was explained that those two options that were highlighted scored significantly higher than any other option as part of the options appraisal workshop. Excuse me. And that the discounting of the do nothing option has been set out in some detail in all of the other documents. It was also noted that the 6 shortlisted options were included as part of phase 3, even though these weren't the highest scoring options, but that was comprehensive within the phase 3 engagement. Lice made some further observations regarding that NHS bodies retain responsibility for service change, but it's important that they work in partnership with their communities and develop proposals in a genuinely co-designed way. And their concern is that not enough clear and easy to understand information was provided for people to be able to engage effectively. So we agree that time is always a luxury, and to have had more time to have worked continuously and refined the engagement documents and the information further would have been helpful. But at the same time, we know that we have, with confidence, built on the engagement materials from phases 1 through to phases 3, responding to public feedback as we've gone, and is reflective of the conversations that we were able to have in the many hours that we spent with communities since March last year. Let's note the high volume of, they note social media comments, about 17,000, but I think that actually refers to the membership of the 2 Facebook pages as opposed to comment volume, and also that petitions have not yet been analysed nor taken into account in writing the final recommendation report. So just for clarity and completeness, the membership of the 2 Facebook groups is circa 17,000. And that, again, just to reiterate what we said before, the Facebook route wasn't a formal route to receive feedback. And that was something that was set up by the campaign groups as a way of them sharing information, not set up by the EASC team as a data collection point for feedback. However, we recognise that the sentiment expressed in Facebook and the dialogue that we've had with the campaign organisers throughout, we were able to work into and respond with that throughout the process. To provide assurance on the petitions, they have been incorporated, and that is in the engagement findings section of the report. We have been advised, as Steve mentioned earlier, that the 2nd petition has been received yesterday at Powys, and we are aware that there's in effect approximately 33,000 signatures to that, and the information that we did have available at time of writing we have included within the engagement report. Let's go on to note that they remain concerned that phase 3 engagement may have digitally excluded some people from engaging with the process, and to confirm that the phase 3 engagement plan has been delivered as per the agreement. Health boards obviously provided opportunities through their engagement routes for their respective populations to participate, and again we're grateful for that and for the work that they've done in their respective areas. And the snapshot survey reports that were provided, as well as a cumulative report, meant that we were able to remain agile and further promote wherever possible. So I know that health boards were integral to that process. So again, thanks for that. Llais want to note that they have some concerns about the level of detail in the 5 recommendations to provide assurance that community concerns have been addressed, incorporated and mitigated. Just to note that there are 4 recommendations in that package, not 5, and we recognise that it is a difficult balancing act to manage balance community concerns and the perceived answer to these. And I know Ross is going to go on to that in more detail about recommendation 4 shortly. But page 45 on the engagement report explains the extra actions that can be taken, that these are explained in more detail, and I know that that's subject for the discussion today. And the final Llais point is that this is their representation, and we confirmed that we would be noting this and carrying this through to the EASC meeting today and on the 28th. I'll pause there.
Okay, any questions so far?
I'd like to ask one.
Please, Gwen.
Just to say, I'm, I suppose, asking the committee themselves, do they feel that we've properly considered the representations that Llais have made to us in terms of what we've just provided? And is there anything further that we should do? And also, there was 2 questions in the first part, which is, do you want us to undertake additional work to create an easy read version of the engagement materials and make all responses to the feedback available online, because that's quite a considerable bit of work. So just wanted to ask that. And finally, do health boards have a view about the information that we provided? As in, do they feel, because obviously Llais have raised this on a number of occasions. That's okay.
Okay, well, we've got some questions coming up, so we'll bear those in mind, I think, when taking this forward. Hayley, please.
Hello, and thanks for the presentation, Lee and Stephen. So just building on that point that's just been raised, I mean, I think the first thing to say is the Llais opinion around this is really important. And clearly, as Powys Teaching Health Board, we're meeting as a board tomorrow. So I think there's a very practical point about how we'll be sharing the response of EASC in this meeting today around the representation from Llais and our response around that, because it's really important that we're able in the board meeting tomorrow to provide assurance on our response to these points that Llais have raised, and clearly we'll be inviting Llais to give a view to inform the board discussion in our meeting tomorrow. But I think the key point for me with this is the key consideration that we need to reflect on today as a committee is, do we feel we've had sufficient time to conscientiously consider the views and the merits of the really strong strength of feelings and criticisms that have been set out within the consultation responses and with regard to Llais's representation, and being able to demonstrate really clearly to what extent we've considered those views as EASC, and be clear about rejection or dismissal and the reasons for that. So I'd really welcome some further conversation on that point, process-wise, during today's meeting. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Hayley. That's fully understood.
I agree, Hayley. It's really important that we pay due regard to the representations, the important representations made by Llais. In terms of the practical point, I think we need to respond to the Llais letter. My suggestion would be that we draft a response after today's meeting, that then could be used by boards. But we do that collaboratively. So we get a form of words that we're all comfortable with. I know the time is quite tight on that, Hayley, but it's really important that we do that. So I know you go first from a health board point of view. So practically, I think we can do that. There may be some issues then that are raised. There will undoubtedly be issues that are raised at your board, which we then will need to take further account of. But having that starter for 10, I think, would be the most practical way forward. Does that sound reasonable, Hayley?
It is. I think it will be important that we have that available for the board meeting in the morning, Stephen. So yes, I'd welcome that. Thanks.
We'll work on that straight after the meeting is finished today, Hayley, to make sure that we're in a position to do that. Can I move on then to there's one set of issues which are around twice. I think there's another set of issues, and the other set of issues are issues raised by the campaign group and also from the letter that you will have received from a member of public in Paris. Again, I think it's really important we pay due regard to those representations and that we're clear about how we're going to handle those and what the issues are. So I'm going to hand over to Ross now, if I could, just to work our way through that before we then move on.
Thank you, Ross.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Chair. So I'll attempt to take members through both Appendix 3 and the letter you've received. I will do my very best to avoid repetition because a number of the issues, particularly within Appendix 3, are very similar to the slice letter, and therefore I think have already been addressed. So I'll attempt to go through that way. I don't intend to take members through every line of the comments within Appendix 3, but I'll go through broad themes that are aligned to the detail that's available to members in the report. So firstly, the campaign group raised issues around data mission creep and narrative change, which I think focuses on the justification for change. And the group particularly raised concerns around the rationale for change, and they did not feel that a sufficiently strong justification for change had been made, and nor did they believe that such a justification existed. In considering these concerns, we've reflected that, as Stephen has mentioned earlier, that there remains a large level of unmet need across Wales, that this unmet need is not uniformly distributed across populations or health boards. There remain bases that are significantly underutilised compared to others, and there is limited overnight provision, particularly in northern parts of Wales. And individually, I think all of these issues are strong justification for change, and combined, they provide a compelling case for change that I believe is evidenced within the review and the report and the final report. Secondly, the campaign group raised a number of particular issues that they felt existed around unmet need. The first being that they were concerned around how unmet need had reduced between 2022 compared to 2021. And we'll accept that whilst we made multiple references in numerous documents to the introduction of an additional day shift in Cardiff in April 2022, we did not explicitly reference this within the unmet needs section as one of the potential contributors to this reduction. In addition to this, they raised concerns around, even if the recommendations were implemented, that there would still remain a large level of unmet need across Wales, which again we accept. There is no intention that this is by the final development of the service. And as outlined in all of our documents, and particularly the history of the service, this is a service that's continually adapted and evolved since its establishment, and we would expect it to continue to do so in order to drive down that level of unmet need across Wales. And finally, they raised concerns around the clinical outcomes of those who had an unmet need, and questioned whether, if they had received a response, would their outcome have been affected by this. And I think in considering this, it's important to remember that the recording of unmet need is based on the perceived requirements for pre-hospital critical care intervention as assessed by an experienced critical care practitioner within the control room. And whilst, of course, there are patients in both the met and unmet need cohorts that will not or did not require critical care following the attendance of the service, this is something that can only really be assessed in hindsight. And so I'm not sure that is a worthwhile area to explore, given that we are identifying these patients at the point of call as requiring a critical care intervention, and therefore we need to adapt the service to be able to respond to those. Following on from that, the group raised concerns that Lee has already picked up around the detail around the additional actions that have now been articulated as recommendation 4. And whilst we accept there is an ongoing level of detail required around this recommendation, I think it's important for members to note that the development of this recommendation is specifically a direct response to the concerns that we heard through the public engagement phases, where people shared their anxiety around the provision of emergency health provision, particularly in those rural and remote areas. However, what I would suggest is much of their concerns surrounding conditions that would not necessarily require pre-hospital critical care intervention, and so wouldn't necessarily fall into the remit of this highly specialised service. And as Stephen has touched on, typically around less than 1% of total 999 demand. But that is why we included the development of bespoke service offerings for rural and remote areas, particularly to focus on the requirements around enhanced and perhaps sub-critical care levels of response, recognising that as a national service, the implementation of these recommendations will maintain a service for all people within Wales. Then they raised issues around the workshops, and I won't go into detail on this. Lee has touched and Stephen has touched earlier on the concerns and the very similar concerns articulated by the campaign group around the reasoning for the workshop and the representation of health board staff and air ambulance and charity staff at the workshop, as Stephen touched on earlier. And again, the campaign group raised issues around the similarity of the two preferred options put forward, and again, Lee has touched on that in her presentation. So again, I won't repeat that. There were issues raised around the questionnaire and again the detailed and extent of the documents required to read in order to respond to the questionnaire. And as Lee touched on, every effort was made to ensure that the relevant information was shared. We did develop easy read versions where possible, and we created multiple ways of allowing individuals to respond to the engagement, including by telephone and email. The campaign group also raised concerns around ministerial oversight and the concerns around effectiveness of ministerial briefings. And while of course it wouldn't be appropriate for us to comment specifically on this, we can confirm, as with all important issues related to EASC, that Welsh Government officials are continually briefed. The campaign group also raised concerns around the decision making of the charity and the ability for it to make changes to its services as they deemed unilaterally. And whilst it's not for us to comment on the internal mechanisms of the charity, I think we would recognise, as Stephen did earlier, that the charity has been extremely successful since its establishment. And as a result of that, it has been able to provide 4 aircraft and the accompanying infrastructure for the population of Wales. This is a much higher level of those available to comparative population sizes in other parts of the UK. And I would just touch on, in relation to the original service development proposal that was brought forward to you by EMIRTS, it should be noted that the committee, through its commissioning intentions, require all of our commissioned services to continually review, model and assess the development of services and to bring forward cases to the committee to deliver improvement. And finally, I just want to touch on the campaign's comments on the preferred option, and the group in the response to us reiterated their support for their preferred option, which in the review document is option 6C, which was the maintenance of the existing base with additional road capacity put into the North East Wales. They did, however, in their response recognise that there were a number of challenges to this option, and they put forward a number of changes for this option, including the relocation of the Carnarvon base to another area of North Wales. And whilst we noted the comments and we did consider these changes, it was not felt that any of the proposed adjustments to this option would change the underlying limitations that were explored during part of the options appraisal for this option. Chair, I'll pause there because that brings us to the end of the comments within Appendix 3, and then I'll come on to the other document, but I'll just pause there in case there's any questions.
Thanks very much, Ross. So any questions in relation to the points raised through the campaign group? Phil?
Yep, thanks. So I had a few questions. First one is about the unmet need, and I was trying to find the detail of the modelling data around your point that it doesn't meet all of unmet need. That the changes wouldn't meet all of the unmet need, which I understand, but I suppose the question for me, given the significance of the change we're suggesting, I wondered how much of the unmet need does it mitigate? That was my first question. The second question was, and this, sorry, my next two questions, I suppose, may be picked up later, so I'm happy, you know, to be deferred on these two. Second one is about the impact of the additional flying time, particularly, I suppose, to the North Ceredigion, Mid Wales residents, and whether there's been a sort of an assessment of that. Because I know that was a particular concern with the preferred option. And the third question is about recommendation 4, and asking about further detail on that recommendation, if it is indeed integral to mitigating any risks of the change. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks. Perhaps I'll pick up the first two questions, and perhaps I'll defer to Stephen on the recommendation 4. So in terms of how much unmet needs, so the model position for the recommended option would suggest that we could reach around 139, 140 additional incidents per annum, so bringing that current level of unmet need of around 1,000 down by 140. So recognising that still allows quite a significant level of unmet need across Wales. We recognise that the development of this service is incremental, and every change we make chips away at that level of unmet need. Even following these recommendations, if they were implemented, unmet need would still be concentrated in the more urban, highly populated areas of North East Wales and South Wales areas. Currently, they have the highest level of unmet need, and they would be required to continue to drive that down. Then just on the second point, so in terms of additional flying time, I think it's important to note firstly, and there's comments within the report around this in terms of the complexities of response times for air ambulance provision in particular. There was very much a perception during the engagement around the rapid response provided by these services, and I think, you know, it's important to note that average response times for these services are in the 40-50 minute bracket from the time of the call. These are services that we don't commission to provide an initial rapid response. They are a specialised secondary response. All of the modelling scenarios do, however, include the changes to both average overall response time, so the response time that the patient would experience from the time of call to the arrival of the asset at the scene of their incident, but also the time of when the decision is made to dispatch the asset and how long that asset then would take to get there. The reality is that on the model position, there isn't a significant shift in response times. For many of the options modelled, the difference was less than a minute. There are some options where the variation is around 3 to 6 minutes. Stephen, I didn't know if you want to pick up anything on the recommendation 4 question.
Phil, if it's okay, I'll pick up recommendation 4 a little bit later on as we go through it. In terms of the additionality of the flying time, then I think that what we're getting at the moment is we're getting a single resource that's been drawn away from South and Mid Wales to try and respond to North Wales. If you have a resource in North Wales, you will get more protected times in South and Mid Wales, so we would expect to see improvement.
Thank you.
Ross is going to go on very quick. If you can go quickly through the other letter, Ross.
I will, yes. So so I'll come now to the documents that we're aware have been circulated to members by a Powys resident, and these documents are also referred to by Llais within their letter to members on the 14th of March, where they termed it as a conflicting analysis of EASC data. I guess before I come to the analysis of the document themselves, I think I would like to recognise that the individuals or groups that produced the documents, you know, have obviously put a lot of work into their production and clearly have a very big passion for the service, and particularly for those bases in Carnarvon and Welshpool. However, that said, you know, I believe there are a number of issues with the analysis contained within the documents that I would want to draw members' attention to, so that they are able to use them in an informed way. I won't pass comment on any unsubstantiated claims within the documents that have been provided, but I'll just focus on those where an attempt has been used to provide evidence. And I think in considering this, it's important to understand that the basis of the document appears to be to set out why the location of a base in North Wales near Rhuddlan is worse than retaining the current base in Welshpool and Carnarvon. I would draw members' notice to within the final report and within the modelling reports that were circulated as part of the phase 2, that we undertook modelling on 1,718 locations across mid and North Wales to assess them for their incident coverage isochrones, and it was that work that identified the location of Rhyl, an area south of Rhyl, Rhuddlan, as the most effective. The documents circulated almost exclusively focus on population coverage by air within 30 minutes from each base, and they do not appear to take into account any of the other flying time parameters, the road coverage from those bases, the distribution of unmet need, the variation that exists in utilisation across bases, how incidents are distributed across Wales, or the feasibility of service delivery to deliver options. It also undertakes an assessment of nighttime coverage and bases this on an air cover within 30 minutes. And members will note that this was flying time was deliberately avoided in the review and the report due to the increased planning times required at night for air that makes a 30-minute response isochrone by air extremely limited, and therefore our report very much focuses on a 60-minute response during the hours of darkness. I'd also say that the document attempts to quantify the total population covered by each helicopter by adding the coverage figures for individual helicopters together and presents this as a total population coverage. However, in doing this, it double, triples and quadruple counts some of the population. And there's a number of reasons why this methodology is flawed, but chiefly results in a claimed population coverage figure that's many times larger than the populations of Wales that doesn't accurately reflect the reality. And in addition, when applying this methodology, it's not applied consistently throughout the document. And I would draw members' attention to the analysis of the time period within the document between the hours of 7 PM to 8 PM. Again, this assumes a 30-minute air response. Within this, the individual helicopter coverage for Cardiff, Welshpool and Carnarvon are all added together to achieve a figure of circa 4.2 million, again, which is larger than the population of Wales. But when in the same analysis, when it looks at the Cardiff and Rhuddlan scenario, only the helicopter coverage for Cardiff and one helicopter from Rhuddlan is accounted for. This is despite the fact that should the recommendation be adopted, there will be 2 aircraft with a 2 crews, each operating at Rhuddlan during this time period, and therefore the additional 780,000 population that would theoretically be covered under the methodology used in this document by helicopter are omitted. It also states in a number of places throughout the document that there are 30 minutes flying time. The combination of Rhuddlan and Cardiff would leave a coverage gap in the middle of Wales. However, I would ask members to review the population coverage maps provided as part of the phase 2 engagement that demonstrate that this wouldn't be the case. Of course, we do accept that there are drawbacks to the locations of the base near Rhuddlan, and these are set out on pages 46 to 48 in the final report. I'm more than happy to provide members with a more detailed line-by-line analysis of this document if required, but in the interest of time, I'll pause there. Unless any questions, I'll pass back to Stephen.
Thanks very much, Ross. You want to come in?
Just double checking that we don't have any questions. I think in terms of the representations that we've received, it's important that we do take due notice of them and respond accordingly. So it is really important that we respond accordingly, because I think that the people that have taken the time to put this information together should get a response back from us. So we will commit to do that, Chair.
Thank you.
There's no further questions. We'll move on then to on the presentation. Thanks, Ross. Ricky? So in terms of other elements of assurance, as I said, we've included a detailed equality impact assessment. I'm grateful to colleagues in health boards for their support in helping us to produce this. And as you know, this has been regularly updated and we have published this. We've also sought advice from King's Council via Shared Services, Legal and Risk Services Division. Thank you, Ricky.
Let's go back on.
Yeah, I think you need to go back.
That's it.
Just a few reminders, really. What we have said in producing the recommendations is that actually, if you get a service now, you'll get a service in the future. We know that people are really concerned about not getting a service. What I can provide assurance on is if you get a service now, you will get a service in the future in terms of the work that we've done and the bundle of recommendations that we've put forward. We will treat more patients. And we will allow more patients to get access to the service. We have looked at urban and rural needs. We won't just chase numbers. So this is not about just saying we can get to more people if we did it this way, because otherwise we would compromise the first point that I've made. We have used a variety of indicators and metrics. We know that some options are better than others, which we've reflected in the long list, short list and workshop process. But what we don't have is we don't have a single option that's the perfect answer, which is why we've got a bundle of recommendations. Thank you, Ricky. What we're looking at here is just to make sure that we're making the best use of these valued and experienced clinical teams that we've got across Wales. Is the service too specialised and do we need a bespoke service for rural areas? I was very struck by the strength of feeling that we had from rural areas. People are really concerned. They're really concerned about infrastructure and they're really concerned around what that might mean for them. What I think has happened is that they are assuming that the air ambulance service and the EMERT service will come to them if an ambulance is not available. Well, that isn't the case. So if, for example, you have a stroke or a heart attack, then unless you need critical care, you will not be getting access. The EMERT service will not be coming to you. I think we can start to do things about that, which is why we've included that in one of the recommendations. We need to make sure that the charity is able to secure an appropriate base, and we need to make sure we have a clear plan which will helps to manage the transition and implementation with appropriate stages in that plan that we can work ourselves through. Thank you, Ricky. Lee has covered this in the detailed response she gave to Appendix 2 in the report, and also the Llais letter that we've had. So I won't go over that again, but just to say we've covered those messages. We do understand that local people are worried about closing bases in Carnarvon and Welshpool, that they think they will lose a service as a consequence of that. Thank you, Ricky. So in terms of the breakdown of the responses back in phase 3 of the engagement, predominantly we had responses from Powys, then we had responses from the Betsy area, and then we had a small number of responses from other parts of Wales. Thank you, Ricky. when we asked a representative sample of the people of Wales, we asked Picker to do this for us, you will recall, then you get a slightly different view. So understandably, you have local interest and local concern where there is a base, because people believe that if you've got a base, you're guaranteed a service. And that isn't the case, of course. So what other people have said is it's really important that the representative sample has said it's really important that you have an effective road response. If the service does change, then we need to make sure that we're making the best use of individual skills. Everyone in Wales should have equal access to the service, and you need to have a plan to be able to support that. And the key message was do more if we can. So that's the messages from a representative sample of the people of Wales, which again isn't surprising that you've got a difference between that and local interests. Thank you, Ricky. So Ross has gone through why do nothing is not a good option. So I won't go through that, but I'm happy to pick that up if people want more information on that. Thank you, Ricky. And again, there are risks associated with that. The one thing that I can't unknow is that at the moment there are about 530,000 people in Wales who after 8 o'clock at night are not getting access to this service. So, you know, there's certain things in this that you can't unknow, I think. Thanks, Ricky. So in terms of the process that we followed, phase 1 considered factors and weightings, and we have responded to those. Phase 2, we looked at the agreed factors and weightings, and we also saw comments on options to be modelled. We listened to those, and we added additional options in as a consequence of that. We then did an option appraisal process with nominated representatives from health boards and trusts, and in phase 3 we asked for feedback on those shortlisted options and the 2 highest ranked options. Thank you, Ricky. So in terms of additional actions, what we noted at the workshop, and it's my belief as well, is that neither option A or option B addressed all of the feedback that we received. I think we have an opportunity to do things better, and I think we have an opportunity to make better use of the commissioning allocation, which you all make available. So we do not require additional money. And I think there is an opportunity here to develop a bespoke clinical model for rural, remote and coastal areas that will also have the advantage of improving ambulance response times, and won't be and will be an alternative for EMIT staff if they don't wish to work from a centralised base. We find it difficult to recruit into some parts of rural Wales. These are attractive posts that would be available in this bespoke clinical model. Thank you, Ricky. In terms of the recommendations, they're there, but I think there's a bit more detail needed. So in terms of recommendation 3, I think also needs to say that we would have an agreed transition plan with a critical path and with phases included in that, agreed within the next 3 months, because I think it's really important that we do that. And in terms of recommendation 4, I think we need to have absolute detail on that bespoke service, where it would operate from, how it would operate, and the scope of practice, and how we would implement that within, I think, 3 to 6 months. By the end of 6 months, I think we should have that in place. What does all that mean? It means I think there's a bundle of recommendations, not just a single recommendation. And I think if we do that, all of those, then instead of having 4 bases in Wales, we'll probably have 5. We'll have 5 bases in Wales. But more importantly, we'll be seeing more people than we do at the moment, and we will be having a bespoke service where we need it in rural, remote and coastal parts of Wales, northeast Powys, northwest Wales coastal areas, where we know that there are gaps and we need to try and plug those gaps. I think that we can do that within the existing commissioning allocation. And I think there is a lot more ongoing engagement and communication that needs to be done. So we need to continue to work with local people. Local people need to get a sense of ownership on that. So I will need to work with you and with WAST and with EMERTS. We have the support of EMERTS and WAST for the way forward here. We need one of the things that I've been potentially criticised for is only being able to see this highly specialised service, only being able to see three more patients a year. So 3 more patients who might otherwise not survive or not live such a high quality of life. Well, I've had a lot of criticism through this process, but if that is a criticism of me, it's one which I gladly accept, because I think it's really important that we do this. But I do accept that there's a lot more detail that we need to put together. I didn't want to have scope creep, so I was damned if we do and damned if we don't on that. But we need to nail that down quickly, which is why I'm suggesting the amendments that I am suggesting. And I'm happy to take questions before you ask colleagues for their views.
Thank you.
We've got Suzanne Rankin on
Okay.
to leave at 12. So.
Right. Nicola, please.
Hi, yeah, thanks for that presentation, and you know, huge amount of work gone into this really important issue. So I'm just going to kind of share my reflections. So recognising from an iron Bevan, you know, it doesn't appear that we are as directly as affected as others, but you know, I think every health board is affected because, you know, how we use our resources effectively, as you said, across the whole of Wales will mean that we will be transferring that really special resource to different parts of Wales as we need it. So I think all of us are affected by this change, and that's important for us to recognise. You know, I think at the high level, the case for change, you know, from my knowledge, seems very strong. That unmet need is a real concern, and it's important to share the resource as much as possible. I know from linking in with some of my clinicians, there's a lot of kind of strong clinical support for this, but I'm not sure how much of a consensus there is across the whole of the EMERTS team, and I think it's important for us to check that out. But I know the overall view is, you know, this will offer a safer system across Wales. I am, though, given, you know, so I'm just trying to take the perspectives, you know, the strong representations have been made, is how we provide our reassurance to those populations, particularly in Powys, who feel that they will get a lesser service as a result of this change. And, you know, some of the detail I've seen in conversations is that we need to make sure that doesn't happen, and we mitigate any risk of it. In fact, we should enhance the support that that population receives by better access from the other bases, and that additional road support that, you know, can be critical as well. So that's my only issue, is overall, it feels like it makes a lot of sense from my perspective. I know locally our clinicians who are part of EMERTS, and that's not locally in terms of how it affects our population, is looking at the wider Welsh system and how much safer it would be. But how do we? I'm just thinking about our timing on this, and this has been a long road, but we've still got a very concerned population. And I just think we need to think about how we could use maybe some of our clinical resource to help alleviate the concerns that this is a safer offer that will meet more people's needs in Wales. So they are my views, just in terms of a contribution. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. So a few things to say about that. Of course, AB residents will benefit because we'll meet some of the unmet need that we've got, that we've currently got in Aneurin Bevan. So you will gain more people. More residents of Aneurin Bevan will be seen, which is good. In terms of the clinical buy-in, I think we've got some clinicians in some areas that are that are worried about the change, but I think the majority would support the change. So the issue is, how do we deal with those other clinicians to make sure that we can alleviate their concerns? I very much like the idea of making sure that when we're doing this communication and engagement process that we need to do, that's much more clinically led, because we need to alleviate those concerns. I think in terms of taking a commissioning approach to this, Nicola, then we can review and evaluate as we're going on. It's really important that we do review and evaluate that we're going on as we go on. But we have this clear transition, we have these clear timescales and this clear transition plan that's backed up by this comprehensive communications and engagement process that you were describing. I think that's really important and something that we should definitely include in the recommendations. Hopefully that was helpful, Nicola.
Carol.
Thank you very much indeed. Just to make a few points to thank colleagues, first of all, for the work and the presentation, and to thank you, Chair, for holding this meeting. I think openness and transparency is really, really important, and the issues that we're discussing are so significant. I know at first hand, people feel this is about life and death, so important that people can see how seriously we take this issue. And I say that because I think I might have been the only chief exec who was around the table when we first signed off the proposal back in 2015. And then, of course, I was in Powys, and the disproportionately positive impact per head of population that Powys received as a result of this service at Powys residents, some of whom I have met over the years. So thank you for putting this into that open and transparent consideration. A couple of things for me. I think in the meeting of EASC on the 30th of January, there were some concerns raised about the time that was available to make the process work effectively, in terms of both being able to engage with people, but also the due consideration and the working through the mitigations and addressing some of those issues to a level of which we felt comfortable that we had done all that we could. So I know that reassurances were given by yourself, Stephen, back in January. I think where I think I am now on this is that the Llais concerns are significant. I know we've received a verbal presentation today to mitigate some of those concerns, but that they are important, and I'm not sure I've fully got to the place where I think we have dealt with them to the fullest extent, and it may be that there's a bit more work that needs to happen on that, because I think that's the crux of the issue, is that whatever decision is taken, it has to be rested upon appropriate due consideration, and we show that each of the issues raised has been considered, and a sufficient mitigation proposal put in place. So there's that. Just picking up from Nicola's point about the view of clinicians, there has been mention of highly valued staff, and I want to say that staff who work in this service are certainly valued by us as a health board, and their views are important. So we haven't really got very much detail on what those concerns of some of the clinicians are, and I would be pleased to hear a bit more about that, if that's possible, because actually if they are clinical concerns, then we really need to make sure we've got the right clinical response in place. And then finally on process, I recognise that Lee provided detailed explanation and apology in relation to the availability of the documentation and having sufficient time. But I do think this is still a matter that we need to consider as to whether the process to this date is fully guaranteed, if you like, in terms of whether it's been exhausted. My second point then mainly relates to recommendations, and I welcome Ross's comment really about this development is not the final development of the service, and therefore it's important that we give careful consideration to any decisions that we might take now that could affect, limit, or even enhance developments for the future. So we do need to have that long-term consideration in mind. In terms of the recommendations, I think they have to be considered collectively and not individually or a single recommendation. So I don't think I can say I support recommendation X but not Y. And I think we should agree that as an assumption. And so with the recommendations, I think, Stephen, you've indicated that it needs more detail, and I would support that. My concern would be 6 to 12 months to develop a bespoke road-based enhanced or critical care service for rural and remote areas is just too long. Should that not be developed, at least in outline, and put forward as part of a suite of recommendations? And you may have views on what that looks like. And then just the final bit on recommendation 2, if I just comment finally, and that's surely we should be clear when we're making a decision that if, and I stress if, we were to decide to move 2 bases into one, we would surely need to know where the 1 base would be in helping to make an effective decision. But yeah, thank you very much indeed for all the work that's gone into this. This is a tricky decision to take.
Thanks, Carol. Stephen?
Thank you, Carol. Really helpful as always. So in terms of the absolutely making sure that we pay due regard to the important representations we've received from Pleiss and others, really important point. And I need to take that away as an action, translate that back into this is how we pay due regard to that, make sure that people are happy that, so that when we meet on the 28th, we're content that that is the case. There's a timing issue in terms of powers, which we've talked through, so we need to do that speedily. So we'll do that speedily. That doesn't mean to say that it couldn't develop further as we move forward in March. So I agree with that. I very much agree that what we need to do is look at the recommendations as a suite of recommendations, not as a single recommendation. I'm very much in that space, and we need to make some of the recommendations more detailed. If a new base was to be agreed, then a new base couldn't be established until 2026. But that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't make every endeavour to put improvements in the service before that. So as soon as we can do that, we need to put that in. So if you're going to press me to a 6-month timescale instead of a 12-month timetable, which I think is a perfectly legitimate challenge, then I think we need to take that challenge up, and we need to move forward on that basis. I think that's the right thing to do. And in terms of the staff, then the response has not tended to be about clinical concerns. It's about how can we recruit and retain staff. And I think we can recruit and retain staff better as a consequence of these recommendations, but we need to make that clear as well. I understand that.
Thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Carol. Hayley.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with all of the points that Carol has just set out. Just a couple of additional points from my perspective. The first one is, the 66% response rate from Powys is a testament to how much the county values this service. It's highly regarded, and clearly we also want to support the reduction in the overall level of unmet need across Wales, and what the purpose of this review has been trying to achieve, which is making sure we're providing the best possible service for the whole of Wales. Having said that, I think that it's really helpful, Stephen, about the acknowledgement about the need for more detail and that reassurance about seeing all of the recommendations collectively. I'd probably go one step further in really to truly be able to take the right decision, we need that detail in order to support the decision-making process and how that compares with the overall assessment now with the additional of that recommendation 4. And I also would say that what if we were to approve that at a point, then we would need a very clear fire break that those changes and those services are in place before any changes to any sites were actually implemented. But I think the point I wanted to add is really the relationship with Wales Air Ambulance and the status of the organisation in relation to the very clear risks that you set out earlier around the financial risks to the charity. So I am mindful of that as well. And I think how we continue to work with Wales Air Ambulance as we proceed with this a more detailed assessment and understanding of the collective model around the preferred option being presented, it's really important that we recognise the risk around the maintenance of charitable income streams to sustain the delivery of the service and the context of that currently in terms of the strength of the feeling. And I know that as a committee and the board tomorrow in Powys will be thinking about this through the lens of public confidence, reputation, but also that first point I raised right at the start when we talked about the latest oral update around the llais representation. Can the board take assurance that we've given conscientious consideration and sufficient time to really assess the merits of each of the arguments that have been put in place to date? So the reason I'm raising this, because our board meeting is tomorrow, I think it is difficult for us at this stage to be able to move forward with some of those aspects, because I think we do need sufficient and additional detail to be able to give full assurance to the board to enable a decision to be taken tomorrow. And I just wanted to signal that in today's meeting, that that's something we probably need to discuss outside of today's meeting, Stephen.
Yeah. Thanks, Eddie. Happy to have the conversation outside the meeting, and clearly we need, just to repeat what I've said, it's really important that we pay due regard to that representation, and with you in terms of that critical path and how things are connected to make sure that we do that. And I'm also with you in terms of making sure we've got the right level of detail to move that forward, but keeping the charity on board as well and making sure that we're able to stabilise the charity in this is a very well made point as well. So there's a bit of a balancing act, isn't there, that we have to try and work through on this. So I welcome that conversation outside the meeting to make sure that we can strike that appropriate balance, Hayley.
Thank you, Hayley. I do have Richard, and I think Suzanne as well. I'm just going to make one point, if I may. It's currently 12:04, and I know that all of us have a meeting at 12:15. So we're really up against time. I'll have to take advice on what we're going to do about the rest of the agenda, but I don't want to cut across this current item. So I'll bring Richard in now, please. Richard.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chris. I'll be brief. Suzanne, just a note, has had to leave the meeting, but has left a note in the sidebar in terms of her view from Cardiff and Vale's perspective. And I'll be brief because I broadly agree with what others have said. I think Llais's letter is particularly helpful, and I found Ross's detailed explanation, discussion around that very useful too as a basis for providing that response back to Llais. And I think it would be important to see if we can get that response with the detail that Ross provided to return that to Llais as soon as possible, and see if a response can be secured from them to indicate whether that covers the range of concerns that they've raised. But you know, in terms of making sure then when we take it to our respective boards next week is to be clear then what the outcome of that conversation is, so that we can then be assured that in terms of the legal advice provided, Llais's view and their support has been secured ahead of board, so board can take that in the round.
We will draft a response that we can then of the detail that's required, Richard, and we will circulate that round to everybody just to make sure that you're all content with that, and then we will send that off ASAP. Whether Llais actually provides support or not, I'm not sure whether they do that, but in terms of what their response back is, it's really important, I agree, in terms of informing this decision-making process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Any other questions, comments?
Do you want me to read what Susanna?
Yeah, could you please?
I support what Carol's saying. I think it's difficult to recommend all the recommendations to the JCC at this point without more detail and potentially time. I think a plan to consider next steps towards addressing remaining unmet need would be helpful. Sorry, I have to go. I can see the direction of the discussion and will support consensus of the committee in agreeing recommendation to joint committee for consideration, for discussion and due consideration.
Thank you. Oh, Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, very similar to other colleagues, really. I think this is a question of just making sure we've got enough time to review the feedback that's come in. I mean, just as we've been talking, I've also had an email, I'm sure other colleagues will have done as well, from an MS raising some concerns about this and asking some questions. And I just want to make sure that, you know, we have the appropriate time set aside to investigate and understand the particular concerns being raised from both residents, politicians, clinicians, and I just think I guess I would advocate that we take the right amount of time, even if that means timescale slipping slightly, and I appreciate that means complexity with the new JCC coming into being, but the important thing is to make the right decision with the right information and consideration. So probably would just advocate that we don't try and rush this through by the end of this month, but take the time to do the proper review of the feedback we've had and make sure that we're all making the informed decision.
Thank you, Paul.
There's a bit of a balance act then, Paul, isn't there, in terms of making sure that we're working closely with the charity as well in this. So I think this is what does the art of the possible look like, but the last thing we want to do is not pay due regard to the appropriate representations that we made. So working out how we can best do that, I think, is going to be really important. I think we can make a lot of progress on that. But you're right, we need to make the right decision. In terms of some of the issues that have been raised, then there aren't any particular new issues in that. So these are issues that we have picked up previously through the engagement process that we have followed. But I understand the point you're making.
Okay, I think I'm in your hands now. You know, do you want this report to go to your health boards? I would suggest that you should do that anyway, and come back with whatever feedback you wish. I don't think it would be helpful to delay that. I think no one is challenging the basis on which the review has been conducted. There are some process questions. We've tried to answer, I think, all the letters and representations that have been made, whether from Llais or from other groups. I would suggest that we go forward, you take this to each health board and come back. Suggest we'd also continue to meet on the 28th. We'll make a decision then as to whether we proceed on a particular basis or whether we pass this over to the new JCC. I think that's all I can suggest at this moment, because clearly enough concern has been expressed that we can't really move forward in the way that we had originally intended. But equally, I don't want to pull the carpet from under this this proposal without having a clear idea of how we're going to move forward. So we still have the 28th of March as a backup, but obviously you will then come armed with whatever other information we have provided from this end, and of course the views from your own health boards. Is that a sufficient outline of the way forward? Nicola?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I don't disagree that it wouldn't be helpful for boards to be more cited and consider this. I just assume we would need to change the recommendations potentially of what we're asking the boards to do, unless those recommendations were agreed today to go forward to boards. So I just think we need to reframe recommendations given some of the concerns raised here today around timing and consideration of those strong representations. So that's my only question, is what are we asking the boards to do given today's discussion? That was all. Thank you.
So I agree. We provided a sort of a standard report that could go to each health board. Nicola, what we can do is reflect changes to the recommendations in line with the discussions that have taken place today, but still have that standard report that goes through the health boards. So happy to do that, and we'll turn that around quickly. I'll have a conversation with Hayley in terms of how we manage that from a powers perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So a number of actions there, but clearly we'll amend the report to reflect that last point about the recommendations. But we will work with you in the intervening time before your board so that you can give them as much of the amended information, if you like, as possible. But I do want to clear this point that, you know, we are responding to all the representations that have been made. I think we've clearly done that. I think we should also note the risk to the charity. And now I think, you know, in the intervening period between now and your board's meeting and the 28th of March, no doubt there'll be some urgent discussions. But if it comes to it that we have to delay a formal decision on any recommendations that come forward, then that's the way it has to be. And I fully understand that. Is that okay as a way forward? Thank you. Now I think I need guidance on what we're going to do, because it's now 12 minutes past 12 and we do have another meeting at 12:15. Are you happy that we pass these points over? I do apologise to our WAST colleagues that we've run out of time, because I know they were going to make a presentation on their IMTP. Let me give Jason an option to at least make any points that he wishes. Jason?
Thanks, Chris. I mean, I think given time, I wonder if we offer to commissioners a briefing note on the IMTP and perhaps a bespoke session where we can run through the presentation in the next couple of days that colleagues, if they're available, could dial into, recognising we do need to secure support from the committee prior to our board on the 28th. So I think a couple of pages briefing note on the key themes within it, which we can circulate, and then perhaps a late afternoon session in a few days' time that colleagues could dial into if they're available to run through the presentation.
Thank you very much, Jason. That's an excellent suggestion, and thank you very much for bearing with us and suggesting that. We'll take that on board, and hopefully we can secure the agreement that you need for your IMTP. Are there any other items that we need to deal with urgently? Gwen, anything that we?
Not from my perspective.
No, I think
Stacey's got anything.
Stacey, yeah, is there anything you want to tell us on the finance report 2.8?
It seemed a very clean report, I have to say.
Yes, I was going to say, I don't think Stacey's with us, but it didn't seem problematic at all from the paperwork that we received. So I think we're safe in accepting that. On that basis, then, we will meet again on the 28th of March, and we'll see where we have got to in the various discussions that will take place between now and then. But we recognise that we may not be taking a formal decision on the 28th of March, but we'll see how things pan out in the meantime. Can I thank you all for your attendance today? My apologies for the poor timekeeping on my part, but it was important that we had that discussion about EMIT, so I wasn't prepared to cut across that. I hope you all understand that point. And can I thank you then? And I will see you on the 28th, and no doubt there may be discussions in between these two dates. So thank you very much.
Chris,
yeah.
Have we
Yes,
finished the meet? Has the meeting finished now? Sorry, apologies.
Yeah.
It's
Sorry,
still
yes.
live, I think.
Yeah,
it will remain live.
It'll
I'll send you a
remain live.
meeting. I'll send you a meeting invite now, Hayley.
Oh, thanks, Ross. Appreciate it. Thank you.